Paulogia, and another edition of Ham and Egg News, where we react to Ken Ham reacting to things. If you're new to the channel, take a second to tap on the subscribe button so that you'll be notified when new science, theology, and news videos come along.
Be praying for Ken Ham, as he has talked about on his Facebook page. His mother passed away this past week, and so he's down in Australia.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Ken spoke fondly of his mother often. My sincere condolences to his family. I was looking forward to having Ken on the panel today, and he was even scheduled to be in Canada this weekend. This must have been sudden because Ken posted this video to Facebook just a couple days ago.
Well, hi everyone. Here we are in the Creation Museum, and do we have some exciting news for you? We are going to let you see, well, we're going to walk you through quickly, but you'll be able to see the brand new exhibits open now at the Creation Museum, a massive upgrade.
That's right.
About 1/3 of the museum, actually totally upgraded.
Wow, that lobby of the Creation Museum really takes me back to that time 2 years ago when I went to visit the Creation Museum and watch an Answers News taping live and met Ken, and he told me that he watches my show. At the time I said I'd like to produce a video of my experience in the main part of the museum, but I never did. And now 1/3 of what I saw has been entirely changed? Guess I'd better get on that. Maybe some kind of before and after makeover show. Welcome to Paulogia, where a former Christian takes a look at the claims of Christians.
I've been to leading museums around the world. You know, the British Museum, the Natural History Museum in London. I've been to the museums in Oxford, the Natural History Museum and another famous museum in Oxford. I've been to museums in other countries.
Ken might be a while listing off the museums he's been to that I'm sure were all awful compared to his little gem. So I'm just going to draw your attention to the replica mammoth skeleton behind him. After you buy your ticket and come down the hall, that's the first thing you see. And it's impressive because it's an actual, tangible, real thing from nature and history. Behind that, you see the pterodactyl at the entrance of the first of 3 gift shops. Though maybe they're adding some new ones. Nothing like paying an admission to come buy things available on their website.
All right. So let's turn around and here we go.
All right.
Okay, so looking over Ken's shoulder, I see they haven't changed the creepiest thing at the museum. This display of 2 kids playing next to 2 animatronic dinosaurs, presumably to set the stage for Ken's reality that dinosaurs and humans lived side by side. Now this isn't scary for the kids, it's scary because of the kids. These 2 look a lot more like a 1970s ventriloquist dummy, or maybe a Chuck E. Cheese doll, than they do regular human children.
All right, so this is the brand new entrance. Remember we used to walk through that narrow canyon entrance?
I do remember. It was quite narrow. You may remember Ken and Bodie going through in the Answers News 2018 New Year's special, dragging cords behind them. The place has come a long way. But part of the reason it was narrow was that there were glass display cases with things to look at. The 7 Seas of Creation listing, which is something that gets repeated later, a living fossils case with actual fossils of a Proterozoic stromatolite, Devonian brittle star, Mississippian sea lily, Jurassic dragonfly, Eocene sycamore, Oligocene wasp, Pliocene mollusks, and more. The plaque tells us that living fossils challenge the view that organisms have changed from one form into many other forms over hundreds of millions of years. This is misleading, of course, as some species will stay static after becoming well adapted to static environments. But at least the display had fossils to look at. Then there were a couple of terrariums with birds. Surprisingly, no signs mocking scientists for acknowledging that these are descendants of dinosaurs. This one also had some plastic turtles posed like they're about to be transformed by ooze. Wait, maybe those birds were fake too. I don't remember.
So now we have the brand new entrance here. And you see main exhibits, and we're getting people ready to go into what we call the starting points room. And over here we have some questions with 2 different worldviews, naturalistic worldview, biblical worldview.
All right, so the new one is wider with some benches just in case you're already tired before you even start. And they've replaced the actual fossils and maybe actual birds with what looks to be some kind of wall placards. Who is Jesus? Are humans and apes related? Are human races equal? Was there a global flood? Did dinosaurs and humans coexist? Seems like each is a write-up of what man's word says, that'd be science, and what God's word says, or at least Ken's interpretation of what God's word says.
Yeah, just give people a nice little intro and warm them up to the whole idea.
Because we go to the starting point stream to say there are two basic starting points, two foundations, God's word, man's word.
Yeah, why would people want to get warmed up with actual fossils and animals when they can read some signs on a wall? Oh, there's one of the security guards. They did not like me. Large Kentucky lads.
So now we come into this beautiful space, and this curved screen with an exciting video, which does what?
Looks like this room replaced the old Grand Canyon room. It had a bit of a boot camp tent in the corner with a ton of space around a roped off scene of two mannequins posed as if excavating a dinosaur skeleton. When you read the placard, you learn it's supposed to represent a creationist and a regular scientist, each approaching the same fossil from different worldviews and coming to different conclusions. I guess we'll get this message from the video on the curved screen now. This room had a place in my heart because it's the room where Dr. Charles Jackson filmed all of his scenes for Eric Hoven's Genesis Paradise Lost movie. Again, on the walls of this room were some actual articles of interest: trilobite and trilobite track fossils, a piece of the Campo del Cielo meteorite, and a recreation of the Lucy fossil, the famous member of the Australopithecus afarensis species. Now, the write-ups beside each asserted that we can't know anything about these artifacts because we weren't there to observe them. But at least there were tangible pieces of nature to be viewed. Looks like the renovation just has bare walls. I guess Ken is trying to remove any actual creation from his creation museum.
Very exciting.
Come and stand here with me so people get an idea of the size.
Yeah, one of the cool things we did with this whole upgrade is really utilize the height of the ceilings.
The height of the new ceilings? Is height the new evidences?
So you can see these spaces really open up, and they look huge.
It's so different than what it was. And the space,
really
I don't even know how you actually were able to get all this space in here, because when you think of the old exhibits, you don't think there's so much space in there.
The old exhibit here was the starting point room. On the walls were posters contrasting Ken's interpretation of God's truth with what they call man's wisdom, aka science. But the reason there wasn't much space was that you had 3D objects people could look at. In particular, this Jurassic Park-inspired sculpt of a featherless Utah raptor, with some signage that erroneously pretends that scientists claim that specimens dried out on a riverbank and were slowly covered by sediments. Of course, it is well recognized by all scientists that rapid burial is nearly mandatory for preserving a fossil. The part that is slow is permineralization, the gradual replacing of biological components with minerals. Maybe their new on-staff paleontologist finally corrected them on this? But at the center of the room was...
People have said, what happened to the Lucy exhibit?
Yeah.
It is coming.
It is coming, that's right. And it's going to be in a brand new case. It's going to look really slick.
This interpretation of Lucy display, which had yet another recreation of the bones of the Lucy fossil, and then AIG's interpretation of what she would look like. According to them, obviously just a stock ape. For some reason, the signage actually specifies that the model in this case is not a forensic reconstruction of Lucy, but rather an artist's interpretation. I suspect that admission is part of the reason for reworking.
Our philosophy in it was to kind of clean up our toys in the sense of take a lot of our exhibitry and get them on the walls.
If the whole museum is now pictures and words on flat surfaces, it essentially becomes a book with an admission price that you have to read standing next to strangers.
This is a beautiful exhibit here that Ben Ioka led, and creating these ancient humans. They did these incredible digital sculptures you can see on these monitors.
I saw them working on the computer.
Yeah.
They actually used the same techniques forensic scientists would use in reconstructing what they would have looked like.
Yeah.
So, unlike the old Lucy exhibit, this new display advocates for forensic reconstruction. Fair enough. At least this part has actual skulls to look at instead of just something to read on the wall.
We want to take the skulls and make them look like what they are, right? These are obviously human. You can tell they're just by looking. I mean, you can tell an ape skull when you look at an ape skull.
Yeah.
Making a case against multiple hominid species, creationists love to focus exclusively on the skulls. I suspect one reason is that humans are drawn to faces and feel like they can instinctively make distinctions there, where pelvis and knee bones just don't carry the same emotional connection for us. But more importantly, it's not generally the skull, or the skull alone, that carries the greatest variations in the hominid species. It's in the other parts of the skeleton that AIG will not be putting on display anytime soon. Please see my Science of Genesis Paradise Lost, Part 11, Planet of the Ape Men, if you'd like to see a full discussion on the deceptive tactics used here. Coincidentally, that part of the movie was filmed in the very room Ken is in now.
Well, then we come to this area. Again, you keep dealing with two different foundations. Now we deal with...
So, more stuff to read on a wall. I'd actually be fascinated to read what Ken thinks the evolutionist worldview, that's the phrase I see here, is about hope, justice, suffering, and purpose. I'm sure it's every bit as accurate as their previous sign about how evolutionists think fossils form.
This is now my favorite room at the museum.
I think it's mine as well.
This is the new Biblical Authority Room, which replaces the old Biblical Authority Room, which was basically a stone facade housing 6 mannequins. 7 if you count Martin Luther around the corner. It had a few things to read, but obviously not enough for Ken.
And then made the background a little blurry.
Yeah.
And then slow motion video.
Yeah.
So it actually has, when you're here, it has a 3-dimensional effect.
Right.
So you really feel they're standing there.
Right.
I mean, this room used to have actual 3D recreations. They already had a pretty realistic 3-dimensional effect.
It does look like a skylight.
Yeah.
With the light coming through here.
Yeah, it's really fun. Even when you're working late at night, it feels like you're working during the day. And
Somewhere lost in these 2 new rooms were 2 displays that actually helped to educate a visitor on the war for creationism in the past century, including one depicting the Scopes trial of 1925, where a substitute school teacher ended up being charged and ultimately found guilty of the crime of teaching evolution in schools. AIG always makes this trial out to be a landmark blow against creationism, even though their side won. In any case, I suspect fewer attendees know about the trial than those already thoroughly familiar with the Bible heroes on display.
This really takes my book, The Lie, and puts the relevance of Genesis message, Genesis the foundation for all doctrines, and so on.
we've exhibitified it.
Exhibitified it. Okay, that's a good word. Exhibitified it. Okay.
So they've given up all pretense of being a museum, and are just openly providing a TLDR version of AIG propaganda books.
As we step into here, we're looking at this reclaimed industrial space. And the idea of it is that just as this strong foundation of a building is being reclaimed and lived in, beautified, such we need to do with the book of Genesis.
The person who's reclaimed it is an artist, right?
Right.
And this is what you call street art, is that right?
Yeah, we call it street art.
It's a little bit funny to me that this room is using graffiti-style art to represent a positive reclaiming of a space, when the exhibit that used to be in this room used graffiti to demonstrate how terrible the awful sinners of the world are. The whole concept of Graffiti Alley was strange, because you wouldn't think any time at all would need to be spent convincing an average Creation Museum guest that the world is a sinful place. And yet, they couldn't actually go for shock value, because it had to retain its G rating. Instead of graphic, emotionally impacting depictions of sin, there were little movies with clean-cut people talking about drugs, pornography, and abortion. I bet they could get a lot of people to go to an R-rated sin museum. So last year, graffiti represented evil, and this year it represents godliness. Maybe it's AIG who have been compromised.
This is representative of various biblical characters. I can see Moses with the 10 Commandments there, for instance.
I mean, as a piece of comic art, I think that's pretty great. I like this style, very similar to what I was going for in my Neozoic graphic novels. But basically you have out-of-context depictions of characters from Bible stories. I mean, even if you affirm everything Ken teaches, this doesn't tell you any more about God's creation of the universe than a nice montage of Marvel characters would. It's content-free, and certainly creation-free.
Late in the year, when staff are on vacation and so on, for one of our Answers News segments that's aired on a Monday from 2 to 2:30, instead of an Answers News segment, I'm going to have Alan go through and explain all this in detail. It'll be a great teaching session.
I guess you can look forward to my coverage of that, if it happens.
And so you have Genesis the foundation, and the artist notes.
Oh, I get it. Genesis is the foundation. And apparently for some reason that giant rock is holding up this interior wall somehow.
And then we start really the main part of the museum right here.
Yeah, it all begins here.
Alright, well this looks like the end of the renovated areas because they've come up to the Garden of Eden exhibit just like it's always been. Adam naming all the penguins and dinosaurs, then Adam meeting Eve in some dense thicket for some reason, and then the Satan serpent being a voyeur as the couple enjoys a bath. Then we move into the post-clothing era, where the Adam mannequin has to do some farming, and all those good vegetarian dinosaurs suddenly developed a taste for meat for the first time. Then there's a Noah's Ark area, kind of a narrow hallway that represented 1% of what the full-sized ark would be. You were supposed to imagine what something 100 times bigger was. But because it's basically scaffolding and the scale unimpressive and tricky to extrapolate, Ken doesn't really show this area on tours anymore. He'd rather you go see the new full-sized boat building down the highway. A few more Bible scenes and you get to this room that I spoke about in our last Ham and Egg News episode, featuring a T-Rex skull and that nearly complete Allosaurus skeleton that Ken acquired in some shady dealings with other creationists and Congressman Mark Meadows. Be sure to check out that episode if you missed the story on this one. Other than a few places to eat, 2 more massive gift shops, and the large hall upstairs where they film Answers News, that's about it for the content in the museum. It's sad to see Answers in Genesis remove the few pieces of actual nature that they had, that common evidence that they often refer to, and for kids and adults to be in wonder of, and replace it all with just signs on a wall. I thought we weren't supposed to worship man's word.
This is as good as anything Hollywood will do, but it's better. When I go to Disney and places like that, you can tell when stuff is fake. Mm-hmm. You walk in here and this stuff in here seems real.
Yeah.
This is better than what Disney's doing. The Creation Museum has had a big upgrade. What's Disney been up to this summer?
Hey guys, we're here at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland Park. It just opened and we are so excited to check everything out.
When you first step into the land, you've been transported into Star Wars.
Everywhere you look, Star Wars comes to life all around. Chewbacca was super friendly.
Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run was unbelievable. You can be a pilot, a gunner, or an engineer.
When we hit hyperspace, you're a huge Star Wars fan, so is this everything you'd ever wanted it to be?
Beyond, my mind is blown. This is the closest you can get to being in a galaxy far, far away.
You can live your own adventure. Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is now open at Disneyland Park in California and opens August 29th at Walt Disney World Resort.
Yes. I can see how the Disney Imagineers would really hang their head in shame over your wall with a saying on it. The room with some TVs? And this projector playing a looping animation on a fake brick wall? I'm sure Walt is rolling over in his grave.
And with that, we'll say g'day from the Creation Museum.
So guys,
All right, well, why don't we go back upstairs and see what we've been missing with Georgia, Roger, and Bodie.
He said they have a better chance of me waking up thin tomorrow morning than they do of me taking that motto off our cars. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, is Georgia excited about miracle weight loss or a car motto? Or is she against one or the other? I think we missed some context here. What's the next one?
2 science societies removed BYU job postings over the school's honor code ban on homosexual behavior. And so what has happened, this is Brigham Young University, so obviously this is a Mormon university.
Hey, I heard someone's talking about Mormons and homosexuals, and that's like my brand. So what's going on?
Hey, Jimmy. The fine folks at Answers News are about to tell us why homosexuality is bad. Or why Mormons are bad. Can't tell yet. Maybe both?
And they had job postings on the sites for the American Geophysical Union and the Geological Society of America. But the school has a policy that their faculty and their students are not allowed to show any expressions of homosexual behavior.
Yeah, and actually the way it works over there is they have this thing called the honor code, and it has been used to be so abusive. It's actually something I've talked about a few times, but it's basically people are telling on each other. So it's not even just like you can't be out on campus with like pride stuff on or something. It's literally what you do in the privacy of your home or your dorm or whatever else. If somebody else hears about it, they can run to the honor code office and you can be ejected from the school for it.
For essentially for hearsay?
Oh yeah, I mean, most of the accusations, the evidence is all hearsay evidence.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's almost as bad as thought control.
It kind of is thought control. This is also not just with homosexuality, but a lot of people have seen that video the church put out in the past talking about supporting your friends when they're in the trenches because this is a war. And they were literally talking about masturbation and they were trying to tell people, make sure you tell on your friends when they masturbate. Yeah. Good stuff.
Okay, so not a group activity. All right, fine.
Yeah, not until your senior year. And you start finding the underground clubs at BYU.
The idea that the Earth is millions and billions of years old is definitely the predominant view. And even among the LDS Church, they don't have a specific position against any of those teachings. So they allow for the Earth to be billions of years old. They allow for all types of evolution. So they're teaching those things in their university.
Okay, so it is true that they're teaching those things in the university, that they teach evolution and they teach the academic approach. However, as a Mormon yourself, especially once you get to the temple endowment ceremonies, which happens usually shortly after you become an adult. For men, it's right before you go on your mission, you learn what is supposed to be the literal history of the planet that isn't necessarily consistent with young Earth creationism, but it's also not consistent with what we know about the universe. And it is this idea that Jesus and the angel Michael, who Mormons believe is the same person as Adam, later becomes Adam basically, that those two created the earth and really everything under the instructions of God. And growing up in Mormonism, you still hear lots of young Earth creationist myths because the position of the church has changed over time. But one of the things that they used to teach, I don't know if they still do now, is that the fossils come from planets that basically God, again, it was Jesus and Michael, but that basically when God created the earth, he used pieces of other planets he had made, and some of those had life on them, and that those fossils, they're basically alien fossils.
Is this the first time you've experienced one church berating the Mormon church for being too liberal?
That is pretty strange, for sure. I mean, I definitely growing up had plenty of beration from other churches, but not for being too liberal. But let me tell you, Southern Baptists in the actual South, they're not playing around.
No.
One area that they would say this is a biblical truth and we're trying to hold to that as far as homosexual activity, but they're not willing to take a stand on something like evolution and the age of the earth and those types of issues, which makes sense from a religion that is developed out of the mind of people. They have extra revelation. They add those things in. They're not going to be able to be consistent within their worldview because they're not truly holding to a biblical worldview in those things.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, like, while our motivations are completely different, I don't disagree with a lot of what is said here. The Mormon church, by its design, has to keep undergoing amendments and has to keep undergoing, like, oh, God changed his mind about X or Y. And so even with things like being open to the idea of evolution, though they're open to the idea of evolution, but Adam and Eve have to have been put on the earth basically independent of that. They have to be the first Homo sapiens. They're even okay with the idea of there being like other types of humans and humanoid species before that. But as far as like the ones that mattered, that has to be Adam and Eve. Now, there will be Mormons who watch this and are like, what? I never heard that. And that's largely because they won't have had access to some of the higher up information in the church. But there's lots of like these loopholes of like, maybe it was this way, maybe it was this way. They just won't go for straight up whatever science says. But he's correct in saying this is a man-made religion. It's Christian fanfic that started like, I don't remember the exact date anymore. It's 190. That's actually, I think, the correct number. But anyway, he's not incorrect that they, from the onset, have to be able to morph and change. But Mormons have no problem with that. And when you see firsthand some of those changes, and then you come back a few years later and you ask about them, Mormons just pretend it was never that way. So this, like, with their super racist views, which some of which I grew up with, I now hear that they never believed that. And I was like, what are you talking about? I believed that and was taught that and was there when you were saying those things.
And, you know, the thing with discrimination is, with all these, well, we don't want to discriminate against these people, but then you're discriminating against the school for having that that belief. So somebody's always going to lose in these things. Like, and it's always, and nowadays it seems like it's always the Christians, right, that lose.
I am so used to this argument coming from Mormonism itself. It is this idea of, sure, like you want to say religious freedom, but by granting your religious freedom, you are denying me my religious freedom to exist in a society without yours.
Would it be standard at BYU that like even a geology professor would need to hold to the statement of faith?
It's kind of complicated, and this is mostly from what I understand. So I could be wrong here, but when you're actually in the classroom academically, you can still teach completely consistent with science. Now, that hasn't always been the case, and BYU has actually exited people there from making scientific or legal arguments, for example. they might be in trouble if they then said like, and so now that we see this about evolution, obviously the church isn't true. That would get them in trouble, but they aren't expected to teach anything but the science. Now, whether or not that could conflict with them in church and whether or not their bishop could ask, oh, hey, I know you hold this view in the classroom, but when you come here, do you understand that Adam and Michael created the universe? That's where things could get hairy.
But even someone teaching a non-theology position like geology would be held accountable for what they do in the privacy of their home?
Yeah. I mean, what you do in the privacy of your home, because there's so much thought, information, and behavior control and emotion control in the church. Let's just hit the whole bite model while I'm at it. Yes, that is still the business of the people accountable for making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to. So you could conceivably see somebody teaching a biology course and including, or a psychology course and including things like, hey, here are the scientific facts we know about homosexuality, and then that resulting in them getting something of a grilling from the church and making sure that they still understand that God's intent for marriage is man and woman. But Mormons have backed off on the whole. They now accept that everything is natural and this is something people actually struggle with. They're just sticking to but you can't participate as a full member of the church. You can't get the priesthood and all that kind of stuff unless you either fake being straight or you live celibate. And then even if you live celibate, then you're still going to be denied certain things because you didn't get married, because certain callings require that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So Mormons don't actually believe that same-sex attraction is a sin. Just the expression of that is a sin. And right there is a problem, and it's sort of a slippery slope.
That's a weird thing that she's saying that it's a problem. They would believe being lustful is a sin, but just the natural state of existing where you go, presumably Paul, where you're like, hey, I'm attracted to feminine bodies or females or women or however you would characterize it for yourself. It's easy for me because I just say everything, especially pans, especially someone. Never mind that. The next thing I was going to say is not important. But that is actually, I mean, this is a common sentiment even amongst very radical, religious, very conservative, like it's not a sin until it's a sin. It's not a sin until you're chasing lustful thoughts or you're engaging in the physical act. And Mormons feel that way too. They do think if you're sitting there and you're thinking about, if you're a guy thinking about another guy stripping and it's getting you aroused, that you've now committed a sin. But the simple attraction, the simple state of being gay, which is something that you have zero control over, isn't a sin. Now, that makes it sound like they're somewhat progressive or like it's not so bad. The way they teach it is still resulting in an absolute suicide epidemic in Utah, so it's not good. It's just not as bad.
Essentially, this is bullying, is what this is. This is outright bullying, saying if you don't conform, if you don't agree with us, you're gone. You can't even advertise for a science job, right? Which has nothing to do with their sexuality on our website.
It's funny to hear people from a really conservative and fundamentalist Christian way try and criticize other groups for saying, if you don't conform with us, you can't be here. You can't participate. And in the case of this, they're literally just talking about you can't violate discriminatory laws, frankly, for these job postings and participate. And at the end of the day, it makes a lot of sense because you're talking about two things, homosexuality and geology. Both of these people know more about what is rock hard than anyone else on the planet. So it makes sense that you would put them together.
Oh, you, my friend, are a never-ending source of delight.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree that whenever we're critical of a specific thing like exclusion, there is nuance to the position. No one is saying that exclusion across the board is always a bad thing. It depends on what our qualifiers for exclusion is. So mine would be, I would exclude from anything I was running and could do so. I would exclude bigots. They would exclude, everybody, really, right? Like, who won't they exclude?
Right,
yeah. It's just bananas.
Right, especially considering this is geology, the GSA and the AGU.
It is funny that they're talking about a geological science society called the GSA when that is also the name of a college organization across the country called the Gay Straight Alliance. We had them in high school and stuff too. It's, again, there's just so many parallels.
Well, Thanks for stopping by and letting us know how the Mormon Church is becoming dangerously liberal.
Absolutely. Check out my new website coming soon, what'srockhard.com.
So really what it is, they're promoting a religion. It's called sexual humanism.
Did somebody say sexual humanism? Oh, it's Bodie.
They're promoting a religion. It's called sexual humanism.
Sexual humanism, you know, the religion that Bodie accidentally founded with his rhetoric, that I declared myself high priestess of, the religion that went on to raise almost $5,000 to send a transgender student to university in Kentucky. That religion? I'm all about promoting that religion. Is that what's going on here?
Now, none of us would necessarily agree, of course.
All right, well, I guess I'll just leave then. I bid you adieu. Hi, men.
Yeah, I think that's enough for me as well. Thank you so much for reliving my tour of the Creation Museum with me. Thanks to Jimmy Snow, aka Mr. Atheist, for his insights, and to the lovely Shannon Q for being such a force for good. If you're not already subscribed to both of them, check out the links in the description and fix that today. As always, thank you so much to my patrons, without whom this channel would simply not be possible. If you're willing and able to join them for as little as $1 a month, please check out the link in the description. In the meantime, have you seen this video? It was pretty crazy. Maybe I'll see you over there. Thanks for watching. Later.